Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and this week we are doing another tag video. This is the ultimate Frankenstein tag. Yes, I can't say enough about the importance of Frankenstein to the horror genre and the Frankenstein story by Mary Shelley. There have been so many adaptions of that novel, so many remakes, reimaginings, spin-offs, and all kinds of stuff. Just vitally important to the horror genre. So we are going to celebrate the history of this iconic figure and this iconic story. And of course, the iconic monster. We have to celebrate the legacy of Frankenstein with this ultimate Frankenstein tag. So let's get started, shall we? This is 10 questions all about Frankenstein. So number 1 is going to be, who was the best actor to portray Frankenstein's monster? And I'm going to have to go with, of course, Boris Karloff from the original Universal Monsters classic Frankenstein from 1931, also starring Colin Clive. To me, he just set the standard of what that character should be. He set the standard for the monster. Just terrifying, but at the same time, he showed some real emotion in that role as well. He just set the standard for all others to follow, and yeah, nobody's done it better since, in my opinion. Number 2 is, which film was the best adaptation of the Mary Shelley's novel? Now, that doesn't have to necessarily mean the most faithful adaptation of the novel. It just means the best adaptation of the novel. And I'm going to have to go with the original Frankenstein from Universal Films from 1931, of course, starring the legendary Boris Karloff as the monster and Colin Clive as Dr. Frankenstein. You also had a great supporting cast. You had Edward Sloane there, who was also in the original Dracula. So number 3 is going to be, what is your favorite sequel or spin-off of Frankenstein? Now, Universal had quite a few. It had The Son of Frankenstein, The Ghost of Frankenstein, The House of Frankenstein, stuff like that. It also had Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And then, of course, you had Hammer Horror, which had The Curse of Frankenstein, as well as the sequels, which were like Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, The Evil of Frankenstein, The Horror of Frankenstein, Frankenstein Created Woman. Yeah, so you had quite a few. So what's your favorite? And mine, I'm going to have to say The Bride of Frankenstein. It's not only one of the best horror sequels, it's one of the best sequels ever made in film history. You just can't deny it. It's just fantastic. And Boris Karloff is just as good in the sequel as he was in the original. And maybe even more so, because his character progresses. You know, he learns to speak and he gets smarter as the film goes along. And then you have, of course, the Bride of Frankenstein. And she's not ugly, she's actually attractive, but she had a great look to her, and I love, of course, her reaction when she first comes to life and sees the monster. She's like, screams, and she rejects him, you know, and then the monster just flips out. He's like, she hates me. And then, of course, he has the classic line at the end, we belong dead. Alright, so number 4 is, what is the worst adaptation of Frankenstein? I'm going to have to go with I, Frankenstein, which came out a few years ago with Aaron Eckhart. Just a terrible movie, and it's just filled with terrible CGI, and it's over-the-top Hollywood crap. So that's my pick. Number 5 is, who was the best actor to portray Victor Frankenstein? Or Dr. Frankenstein, if you will. The man who created the monster. And I'm going to have to go with Peter Cushing. That's right, from Hammer Films' Frankenstein franchise. Of course, beginning with The Curse of Frankenstein and all the subsequent sequels. I just feel like he captured that character the best. Such an amazing performance. He just owns that role. So just as he's the best Van Helsing, he's also the best Victor Frankenstein. Peter Cushing, baby. Number 6 is Universal, the Frankenstein monster versus Hammer's Frankenstein monster. And that is from The Curse of Frankenstein. And the monster in that film was, of course, portrayed by the legendary Christopher Lee. So the question is, who would win in a fight? Universal's version of the monster, played by Boris Karloff, or Hammer's version of Frankenstein's monster, played by Christopher Lee? Who would win in a fight? So I'm going to have to go with Boris Karloff. To me, he was much bigger, much more monstrous, much more menacing, much more violent and brutal. And I think he would take out Christopher Lee's version of the monster. And that's not to take anything away from Christopher Lee's version. He was great, and he was awesome in the role, and I love the grotesque makeup job. The makeup work on that was excellent. But I think Boris Karloff would take him. So, number 7 is, what is the best non-horror appearance of Frankenstein's monster? Now, he's been in a lot of stuff, even commercials, you know, cartoons, animated movies like Hotel Transylvania, the monsters in that. You could even say the Munsters. Herman Munster is basically Frankenstein's monster, you know. You could say a horror comedy, that counts, like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein or Young Frankenstein. So yeah, what's your favorite appearance of the monster outside of the horror genre? So for me, that is going to be Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Absolutely. And that is my favorite horror comedy of all time. Just amazing. And the monster was very, very well represented in that film by Glenn Strange. And also you had, of course, you had Bela Lugosi returning to the role of Dracula. You had Lon Chaney Jr. returning as the Wolfman. And of course, Abbott and Costello are just amazing and hilarious. The film is hilarious, and all those characters are great and so well represented in that film. It's just awesome. I love that movie. So, number 8 is in Abbott and Costello versus Frankenstein, or Meet Frankenstein, I should say. Were you happy with Glenn Strange in the role of the monster? Or would you have preferred Boris Karloff return to play the monster, and that way you would have had all the original Universal monsters, you know, and the same actors that played them? You would have had Lon Chaney as Wolfman, you would have had Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster, and you would have had Bela Lugosi as Dracula. So, for me, the answer is both. I really enjoy Glenn Strange in the role of the monster. And I do wish that Boris Karloff could have came back. Just because of the fact that it would have been all the original monsters. But you also have to take into account that Boris Karloff at that time was a lot older, and he probably wouldn't have done any of the stunt work, where Glenn Strange was a lot younger and he could do some of the stunts, you know. But I really enjoyed Glenn Strange's performance, and I wish Boris Karloff came back, so both. That's my answer. Number 9 is going to be a trivia question. Yes, I'm going to put you guys' minds to work. So the question is, who was the only actor to portray Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, the Mummy, and the Wolfman? All 4 classic monsters. Who was the only actor to portray all 4 of them? Obviously, I'm not going to give you the answer, so you guys are going to have to think about it on your own. Number 10, the final question. What are your thoughts on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1994? That's this film right here, directed by Kenneth Branagh, and starring Kenneth Branagh as Victor Frankenstein, and also starred Robert De Niro as the monster. And it had a pretty solid cast as well. It had Helena Bonham Carter, you had Aidan Quinn there, which is my wife's man crush, you know. She loves Aidan Quinn. That's why that's her favorite version of Frankenstein. That, and it's got more of a romantic style, you know. So my personal thoughts are, it was a pretty solid version. But at the same time, there was a lot of Hollywood nonsense in there as well. And I didn't really particularly care for Robert De Niro's version of the monster. He was okay, but not anywhere near as good as like Boris Karloff or Christopher Lee, you know. But yeah, it was pretty solid overall. It wasn't great, but it was solid. What do you guys think? Alright guys, so that's it for the Ultimate Frankenstein tag. Now I'm going to tag some people, but before I do, I just want to say anybody can do it. I want all you guys out there to do it. Everyone is free to do this tag, and I welcome that. But I'm going to tag some people. I'm going to tag Random Horror, The Horror Miser Monty G, Adam Paul Beaumont, Jen's Reviews from the Grave, and that is Jen and Christian, Boogeyman Ben, Horrific Nightmares JM, ANDREWBALLINA, Bronco Juggalo Talks Movies, and Rob's Reviews. So everybody, answer the call and do the Ultimate Frankenstein tag. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.